Today, we will look at the story of the Beryl Alpha Platform Disaster. What happened that day changed the way deep-sea oil rigs were manned and repaired for decades to come. The Beryl oil field is located in the oceans northeast of England and is one of the major oil producers for the country. Consisting of multiple platforms throughout the area, the ones we are worried about today are the Alpha and Beta platforms. On November 26, 1978, the diving support vessel named the Star Canopus was dynamically positioned on the northeast side of the Beryl Alpha platform. The plan for the crew on board was to conduct repair diving operations 334 feet below the surface. They were there that week to repair not only the Alpha but also the Beta platform. Michael Ward was contracted by Northern Divers, a company who regularly does underwater repairs to oil rigs in the Northern Pacific. This job was working about 60 feet off the seabed, trying to connect a 6-inch flow line to a riser flange protruding from the side of a concrete platform. This kind of underwater work usually isn't contracted during this type of year, but with oil production declining that year and with winter conditions upon them, subsea work had fallen behind schedule. There was a lot of catching up to do, as the contract manager for the Northern Divers said in an email just a week before the incident. Mobil Oil, like many operators, decided to allow diving programs to continue throughout the winter months to take advantage of the available weather windows. Earlier that evening, the London Weather Center had predicted 40-knot gusts between 6 p.m. and midnight. That forecast proved to be correct. At 8:30 p.m. and again at 10:45, squalls reaching those speeds moved in and blew the Canopus off location. Shortly thereafter, Captain Roy Forsyth terminated the diving operations. What we must keep in mind about these diving support vessels is that they are very prone to movement from gusts of wind and particular current patterns of the day. If they are moved too far off track, the dive and subsequent repairs must be postponed until the environmental hazards subside. When the 12-hour shift change occurred at midnight, weather conditions had calmed. Coming on duty, Supervisor Robert Kelly was told by the superintendent that the weather was now reasonable to dive in and to continue the dive program. Kelly went to the bridge to review the weather forecast, which predicted there would be a change in wind direction from west to north and that conditions would worsen throughout the early morning, with wind speeds gusting up to 35 knots. The Star Canopus support vessel was only a year old, and although it represented the latest and best technology of the era, the limits of her dynamic positioning system, or DP, were 18 to 20 knots with the wind hitting her broadside. The winds that night met and in many instances surpassed that threshold. On the bridge, Kelly noticed that the wind speed indicator fluctuated between 15 and 20 knots. He walked outside to look at the weather firsthand, and with the wind blowing from west against his face, Kelly gazed across the dark sea. Standing alongside the Beryl platform, near where the Canopus would be commencing work, was the imposing silhouette of the Håkon Magnus, a Norwegian semi-submersible which had multiple massive anchor chains extended all the way to the seabed. Remember this for later, as the Håkon Magnus is watching over the platforms and the diving operations. To Kelly, the weather looked suitable for diving. At 2:40 a.m., he launched the diving bell with Tony Prangley and Michael Ward inside, making it to the bottom in just 20 minutes. At 3:12 a.m., Michael Ward locked out, entered the water, and found the pipe flange protruding from the wall of the platform base. Just 8 minutes later, Captain Forsyth called Kelly on the ship's intercom to alert him that a squall was approaching on the ship's radar. Kelly then ordered Ward back to the bell, and he would swim back inside without problem, where he sat for the next 40 minutes. At 4 a.m., Ward was back in the water and on the job. Then, 45 minutes later, the wind suddenly shifted directions and began blowing from the north at a speed of 40 knots. Hitting the Canopus on her beam and overpowering her DP system, the gusts did not halt. As one man would testify, it was a sustained blow. Quote, "When this wind arrived, it arrived really without any warning, and it was not like a sudden gust of wind or a passing squall which then died down. It started blowing suddenly at 40 knots and remained at that level for a considerable period of time. It was a very strange occurrence to say the least." In the Bell van, Supervisor Kelly was at the control panel when an amber light came on, followed by a klaxon of dive alert alarm. Then Captain Forsyth's voice came over the intercom. "Get the diver back in the Bell." Kelly relayed the message to Ward, who stopped what he was doing and swam back to the Bell. Once inside, he took off his helmet as Prangley stacked his umbilical cord in the storage compartment. On the surface, the force of the wind had blown the Canopus sideways against the platform overhang, snapping off the ship's mast, which came crashing down onto the deck with a loud bang. At the same time, the wind was driving the ship backwards towards the Håkon Magnus. Captain Forsyth quickly took the ship off dynamic positioning and tried to swing the bow outboard to keep the vessel from grounding on the submerged pontoons of the Magnus. Then he proceeded to the dive aboard alarm and called dive control. In dive control, Kelly was waiting for Prangley and Ward to seal the bell when the red dive abort indicator suddenly lit up. Captain Forsyth came on the intercom again, this time with a noticeable urgency in his voice. "Get the bell up as soon as possible," he said to Kelly. But when Kelly called down to the bell, he discovered that Prangley was having difficulty pulling in Ward's umbilical cord. It was snagged on something outside the bell, but he didn't know on what. Since it was stuck on the outside of the bell, there was no way for them to shut the hatch. They had to clear the umbilical before the hatch could close. Ward wanted to lock out, get back into the water, and fix the problem to untangle the umbilical, but Kelly flatly forbid him to do so. Instead, he told Ward to throw his dive hat back out of the bell and then pull in the umbilical, and perhaps that would free it. But when he tossed his helmet in the water, the umbilical remained snagged. Meanwhile, Kelly received another urgent message from Captain Forsyth asking if he had started the recovery of the bell yet. Kelly explained the delay and said he would notify the bridge when he started the recovery. Then he got on the comms and told the divers to stop what they were doing, cut the hose, and to be quick about it. Several minutes later, as the bell continually smashed against the base of the platform, Prangley and Ward finally sealed the hatch and notified topside. In dive control, Kelly was watching his two divers on the video monitor while the bell was being raised. Prangley calling out the depth every 10 meters, 80, 70, 60. When the bell was at 30 meters from the surface, Prangley suddenly stood up, waved his fist shoulder high, and shouted, "All stop!" On the monitor, he appeared to be listening to something. Supervisor Kelly did as he was told, and from the bell van he had a clear view of the moon pool and could see that something was wrong. The bell umbilical and clump weight guide wires were not hanging straight down through the moon pool. They were leaning towards the bow of the ship. What's more, the trolley that the wires were hanging from was violently shaking and vibrating. Suddenly, the video monitor blacked out. The Star Canopus, with her human payload, dangling 30 meters below, had been blown across the path of the Hawken Magnus anchor line, completely severing all connections to the bell, including the life support umbilical, the main lift wire, and the clump weight guide wire recovery system. In that instant, the bell, with Prangley and Ward inside, began plummeting to the seabed below. Both divers would survive the 290-foot fall. Now they faced a harrowing situation. With their hot water supply completely severed to the bell, the internal temperature began to drop rapidly. If rescuers didn't arrive soon, their only recourse would be to drop the weight holding them to the bottom. Prangley and Ward quickly realized that they couldn't release the weight, as it was externally secured to the bell frame, nor was the bell equipped with a strobe flasher to help rescue divers find it in the dark, so finding the capsule was no easy feat. Furthermore, the crew of the Canopus had removed the bell transponder sometime before the dive, which constantly pings out a location to the surface, thus leaving them lost at the bottom. Helplessly trapped, with nothing to keep them warm and no way to release the drop weight, all they could do was huddle together and pray that rescuers would find them in time. As there was a storm raging on the surface, time was not on their side. It took rescuers more than 13 hours to find the capsule and to recover the stricken bell to the surface. By that time, Ward had died of hypothermia and Prangley had drowned. Although Prangley was suffering from hypothermia too, his death was ruled a drowning. This disaster could have easily been avoided if safety precautions were followed. The wind limits of the dynamic positioning on the Star Canopus was clearly ignored. The large surging winds of over 20 knots were clearly over the system's limits, causing the bell to drift into the Hawken Magnus's anchor line, severing the support lines and sinking them to the ocean floor. Rest in peace to Tony Prangley and Michael Ward. They died working for a company who clearly didn't respect the dangers of the open ocean and their own workers' lives. May their death be a constant reminder to repair divers everywhere that you are responsible for your own safety, as companies you work for might not have your best interests in mind. That is the story of the 1978 Star Canopus accident. If you made it this far, please consider subscribing, liking, or commenting. It truly helps me out. And if you want to hear more scary, fascinating stories, make sure to check out last week's video.